The bleeding woman collapsed in the diner doorway, and every customer turned away, except the night shift waitress who pressed her apron to the wound. What no one knew, least of all the waitress, was that the woman carried the vampire king's blood. Now the glass door reflected two figures, one dying, one marked. The debt had already been paid in touch. Maya had been wiping down the counter for the third time that shift, when the woman fell through the door at 3:17 in the morning, silk dress torn at the shoulder and blood running down her neck in a dark ribbon that caught the fluorescent light like oil. The diner went silent in the way that only Frank's diner could go silent, which was the kind of silence that felt deliberate and practiced, the kind where 12 people simultaneously found their phones or their coffee cups or the pattern in the cracked red vinyl booths infinitely more interesting than a bleeding stranger collapsing 6 feet away. Maya froze with the dish rag still in her hand, watching the woman stumble against the doorframe and leave a red handprint on the glass, her other hand pressed uselessly to her throat. The truckers at the corner booth turned toward the window. The cop 2 stools down stood up, looked at the woman, looked at Maya, and walked out the back door without a word. The insomniac who came in every night at 2 and ordered black coffee and nothing else, pulled his baseball cap lower and studied the menu he had memorized months ago. Maya felt her stomach twist because this was wrong, all of it was wrong. The way everyone moved like they were underwater or sleepwalking or following some script she had never been given. The woman took another step and her knees buckled. Maya dropped the rag and moved without thinking, crossing the black and white checkered floor in 4 strides and catching the woman under the arms before she hit the ground. And now's the time to stop and subscribe to our channel. Every subscriber brings us closer to 1,000, which helps us keep these stories alive and coming your way. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these tales travel across the world. Now let's continue. The woman's skin was ice cold through the silk, cold in a way that made Maya's hands ache instantly, the kind of cold that did not belong to anything living. She lowered the woman to the floor and yanked her apron over her head, pressing the fabric hard against the wound on her neck. Blood soaked through immediately, warm and viscous and too dark. The fluorescent lights above them flickered once, twice, and the hum that had been constant for Maya's entire double shift climbed to a whine that made her teeth hurt. She pressed harder with the apron and used her other hand to check the woman's wrist for a pulse, her fingers slipping on cold skin. The woman's eyes snapped open. They were silver, not gray or pale blue, but actual silver, metallic and reflective, catching the overhead light and throwing it back at Maya like coins at the bottom of a well. The woman's lips moved, and Maya leaned closer, her ear almost touching the woman's mouth. "You shouldn't have touched me." The woman's voice was a rasp, barely louder than the hum of the freezer in the back. "He'll know now. He always knows." Maya opened her mouth to ask who, but the woman exhaled once, long and rattling, and went still. The silver faded from her eyes like someone had turned off a switch, leaving them dull and brown and empty. Maya pulled back, her hands shaking, the apron heavy with blood in her lap. She checked for a pulse again, even though she knew there would not be one. Nothing. The fluorescence stopped flickering. The diner stayed silent. Maya looked up, and the truckers were gone. The insomniac was gone. The night cook Frank stood in the kitchen window with a dishcloth in his hands, his face carved from stone and decades of keeping his mouth shut. "Don't call 911, Maya." Frank's voice was low and grim, the tone he used when the health inspector showed up, or when someone tried to skip out on a tab. "Trust me. Just lock the door after everyone leaves." Maya stared at him. Frank had hired her 2 years ago when she had been 3 weeks behind on rent and living out of her car, had given her double shifts and never asked questions, and now he was telling her not to call an ambulance for a dead woman bleeding out on his floor. She wanted to argue, but her throat had closed up, and her hands were still on the woman's wrist, still hoping for a pulse that was not coming. She looked down at the body, and then at the glass door 6 feet away, where the highway stretched into nothing under a sky with no moon. In the reflection, she saw two figures on the floor. One was the woman, silk dress and blood and stillness. The other was Maya, kneeling, apron soaked, hands stained red. Except the Maya in the glass had something wrong with her eyes. A thin ring of silver circled each iris, faint but unmistakable, glowing softly like the edge of a coin catching light. Maya blinked. The reflection blinked back. The silver ring stayed. She lifted one hand from the woman's wrist and touched her own face, her fingers leaving a smear of blood on her cheek. The reflection did the same. The silver did not fade. Panic spiked hot and sharp in her chest, and she lurched to her feet, stumbling back from the body and from the door and from her own reflection that was no longer entirely hers. She turned to Frank, but he had already disappeared into the back, the kitchen door swinging shut behind him with a soft thump. She turned to the diner, and it was empty except for her and the dead woman and the smell of burnt coffee and blood. The bell above the door chimed. Maya spun around. No one there, just the highway and the dark and the parking lot with its 3 scattered cars and a single lamp buzzing with moths. Except, when she looked closer, there had been a black sedan across the street, idling with its headlights off, the kind of car that cost more than she made in a year. She stared at the spot where it had been and tried to remember if she had actually seen it, or if her mind was inventing things to explain the cold certainty settling in her gut that everything had just changed in a way she did not understand and could not undo. She looked down at her hands, blood under her nails, blood drying on her palms. She looked at the woman on the floor, at the torn silk, and the dark hair fanned out like a veil, and the stillness that was too complete to be sleep. "You shouldn't have touched me." The woman's last words circled in Maya's head. He'll know now. He always knows. Who would know? What would he know? What had Maya done by pressing her apron to a stranger's throat and checking for a pulse with her bare hands? The door to the kitchen creaked open and Frank stepped out carrying a heavy wool blanket, the kind they kept in the storage closet for when the heat broke in winter. He did not look at Maya. He crouched next to the body and spread the blanket over the woman with the care of someone who had done this before, tucking the edges under her shoulders and her feet until she was covered completely. Then he stood and finally met Maya's eyes. "You're going to want to wash your hands." His voice was still grim, still flat. "Use the good soap in my office, the stuff with the pumice." Maya's mouth was dry. "Frank, what just happened?" Frank folded his arms. "You helped someone. That's what happened. The rest of it, someone's going to come by and explain it better than I can. Probably tomorrow. Maybe tonight. Just go wash your hands and then lock up and go home and don't open the door for anyone you don't know." Maya felt her pulse hammering in her throat. "And if I call the cops anyway?" Frank's expression did not change. "Then you'll be making a mistake you can't take back." He turned and walked back into the kitchen. The door swung shut. Maya stood alone with the covered body, and the smell of blood and burnt coffee, and the reflection in the glass door that showed a version of herself she did not recognize. She crossed to the door and locked it, her hands shaking so hard it took 3 tries to turn the deadbolt. Then she looked out at the highway one more time. The black sedan was back. Same spot, headlights off. She could not see anyone inside, but she felt watched in a way that made her skin crawl. She stepped back from the glass. The sedan's engine purred to life, low and smooth, and then it pulled away and disappeared into the dark. Maya turned and walked to Frank's office, past the body under the blanket, past the coffee pot still burning on the burner, past the booth where the cop had been sitting 20 minutes ago like none of this had happened. She washed her hands in Frank's sink with the pumice soap that smelled like gasoline and mint, scrubbing until her skin was raw and the water ran clear. When she looked up at the small mirror above the sink, her eyes stared back at her. Brown. Normal. Except when she tilted her head just right, the silver ring flared in the overhead light, thin and bright and permanent. She dried her hands on a towel that came away pink. Then she turned off the lights and walked out into the diner and stood next to the blanket-covered body and waited for morning or for someone to come explain why she could still feel the cold of the woman's skin on her palms and why her reflection no longer looked entirely like her own. Frank made Maya drag the body to the walk-in freezer herself, standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed and his face set in that expression that meant he was done talking, the one that had ended 100 arguments about shift schedules and burnt hash browns and whether the coffee machine was worth fixing for the third time that month. "Someone will come for her," he said, and that was all he said. So Maya grabbed the wool blanket by the corners and pulled the woman across the tiles, her sneakers squeaking, the bundle heavier than it should have been, cold seeping through the fabric and into her palms. She wedged the body between a pallet of frozen fries and a stack of burger patties, her breath misting in the frigid air. And when she backed out and let the heavy door swing shut, she could see the blanket through the small window, dark and still against the white frost. Frank nodded once and went back to scrubbing the grill. Maya finished her shift in silence, poured coffee for the breakfast crowd, smiled at regulars who did not smile back, and felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes that would not quite meet hers. By the time she clocked out at noon, the sun was too bright, and the parking lot asphalt shimmered with heat, and her hands still felt cold from the freezer. The next 2 nights were wrong in ways she could not name. Her shift coffee tasted like metal, no matter how much sugar she added, bitter and sharp like licking a battery, and she poured cup after cup down the sink, trying to find one that tasted normal. She could see in the dark. Not well, not like daylight, but enough that when the lights in the storage room flickered out, she did not stumble, could make out the shelves and the boxes and the rat traps in the corners with a clarity that had not been there before. She stopped feeling cold. The walk-in freezer was just a room. The November wind that rattled the diner windows did not touch her. She rolled her sleeves down anyway because her forearms were bare, and customers stared, and she could not explain why goosebumps did not rise when the door opened and let in the night. The silver ring around her irises stayed faint, visible only in certain light, but she checked the bathroom mirror every hour and it was always there, a reminder that something had changed in a way she could not undo. On the third night, a man walked into the diner at 4 in the morning and sat at the counter and did not order anything. He wore a tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than her car, fabric so dark it seemed to swallow the fluorescent light, and his hands were pale and still on the countertop. Maya poured him coffee he did not ask for. He looked at the cup and then at her, and his eyes were gray, the color of smoke or old steel. "You touched her," he said, and it was not a question. Maya's pulse jumped. She put the coffee pot down carefully. "I tried to help her." The man nodded slowly, like she had confirmed something he already knew. "My name is Dominic. I work for the man whose sister you tried to save. Her name was Isabeau." Maya gripped the edge of the counter. "What happened to her?" Dominic's expression did not change. "She was murdered. By people who wanted to send a message to my employer. You interfered with that message when you touched her blood. Now you're part of a contract older than this country." Maya felt her stomach drop. "I didn't sign anything." "You did," Dominic said. "The moment your skin touched hers. The moment you gave her mercy when no one else would. That's the law. Not your law, maybe, but the law that governs us. And now it governs you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a black envelope, heavy and expensive, the kind of paper that had weight and texture. He set it on the counter between them. The wax seal on the back was embossed with a tree and a crescent moon, deep red wax that looked almost black in the diner light. Inside is an invitation to the glass court. A tribunal. You'll be presented as the king's ward. You have 3 days to prepare. Maya stared at the envelope. "And if I don't go? Then the people who killed Isabeau will come for you. You're a loose thread now. A witness. A liability." They'll hunt you down and they'll make sure you disappear in a way that sends the message they wanted to send in the first place. Dominic's voice was calm, factual, like he was explaining the weather. If you go, you enter our world. Blood oaths and ritual law and politics you don't understand. But you'll be protected. The king is bound to shelter you. That's the mark. Maya touched her face reflexively, fingers brushing her cheekbone. The mark isn't a curse, Dominic said. It's a contract. You gave her mercy. Now the king owes you protection. And you owe him one answer when he calls. One summoning. One truth. That's the law. What if I don't believe in your law? Maya said, her voice tight. Then you'll die believing in nothing. Dominic stood. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket and set it next to the envelope. He'll call, and you'll go. They always do. He walked out and the bell above the door chimed and Maya watched him cross the parking lot to a vintage Jaguar, black and sleek and humming like a predator. He drove away and the taillights disappeared into the dark, and Maya was alone with the envelope and the phone and the taste of metal still coating her tongue. She did not open the envelope until her shift ended, until she was back in her apartment with the door locked and the blinds drawn. The studio was cramped, peeling paint on the walls and a window that faced a brick wall 6 feet away, dim even in daylight. She sat on the edge of her bed and broke the wax seal with her thumbnail. The paper inside was thick, cream-colored, and the writing was done by hand in silver ink that caught the light and shimmered. The words were formal, archaic, an invitation to present herself at the glass court in San Francisco in 3 days' time, to be acknowledged as kin under the protection of the throne. She read it twice and understood less the second time. She set it aside and picked up the burner phone, turning it over in her hands. It was cheap plastic, anonymous, the kind you bought at gas stations. She almost threw it across the room. Instead, she plugged it in and waited. It rang at 2 in the morning. She had been sitting at her laptop for 6 hours, searching for anything about glass courts or blood oaths or vampire kings, finding nothing except fantasy novels and role-playing games and conspiracy theories that veered into madness. The phone's ringtone was shrill and old-fashioned, and she stared at it for 3 rings before she answered. The voice on the other end was low and ancient, textured with centuries and exhaustion and something that might have been grief. I didn't ask for this either. The words were measured, deliberate, but my sister died placing her faith in a stranger. So now you're mine to protect, and I'm yours to endure. The court convenes in 2 days. Wear something you can run in. Who are you? Maya said, but the line was already dead. She sat in the dark with the phone still pressed to her ear and felt the weight of his voice settle in her chest like a stone. She went back to the laptop, searched for Isabeau, found nothing. Searched for vampire courts in San Francisco, found nothing useful. Then she tried something different. Searched for old photographs. Paris, 1920s, aristocrat, Montmartre. It took an hour. The photo was archived on a university database, part of a collection documenting expatriate society in post-war France. Black and white, grainy, taken outside a cafe with wrought iron tables and men in suits smoking cigarettes. In the center of the frame stood a man in a dark coat, pale, sharp-featured, his eyes staring directly at the camera with an intensity that made the hair on Maya's neck rise. The caption read, "Unidentified aristocrat, Montmartre, circa 1924. He looked exactly like the voice had sounded, cold, regal, alone. She zoomed in and her breath caught. In the corner of the photo, barely visible behind the man's shoulder, was a woman in a cloche hat and a light-colored dress, her face turned slightly away from the camera. Dark hair, pale skin, the same bone structure as the woman who had died on the diner floor, Isabeau. Maya saved the image and stared at it until the screen went dark. Then she opened the black envelope again and read the invitation a third time. She thought about Dominic's calm certainty, the way he had said they always do, like it was inevitable. She thought about the voice on the phone, tired and bound by duty, honoring choices he did not understand. She thought about Isabeau stumbling into the diner with her throat cut, looking for someone who would help without knowing what she was. Finding Maya. Choosing Maya. The mark on her eyes was not going away. The people who killed Isabeau were not going to forget her. And the man on the phone, the king, the one who ruled from shadows and old law, had already claimed her as something he was obligated to protect. Maya did not believe in vampires, but she believed in the cold skin under her hands and the silver ring in her reflection and the taste of metal on her tongue. She believed in the exhaustion in the king's voice when he said, "I'm yours to endure." She believed that Isabeau had chosen her for a reason she did not yet understand. She closed the laptop. She would go to San Francisco. She would walk into the glass court and demand answers, and find a way out of this contract she had not agreed to. But first she needed to understand what she was walking into. The next day she called in sick to Frank's and spent 18 hours reading everything she could find about blood oaths and ancient law, and the idea that touch could bind, that mercy could create debt. She found folklore and myth and fragments of history that almost made sense. She found references to courts and kings and hierarchies built on age and power. She found nothing that explained the mark or the summoning or why a dying woman would bleed out in a Nevada diner instead of seeking help from her own kind. By the time the sun set again, she had 3 pages of notes and more questions than answers. The burner phone stayed silent. Maya packed a bag, jeans, a leather jacket, the sneakers she wore for double shifts, broken in and comfortable. She did not own anything she could run in that was not also what she wore to work. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The silver ring flared in the light, thin and bright. She looked tired. She looked scared. She looked like someone who had made a choice without knowing the consequences and now had to live with it. The king had said, "Wear something you can run in." She wondered if that was a warning or a threat or just a fact. She wondered if Isabeau had known what would happen when she stumbled into the diner, if she had meant to die there, or if Maya was supposed to save her and had failed. She wondered what the king looked like in person, if his eyes were as cold as his voice, if he had loved his sister, or just felt obligated to honor her memory. She wondered if she was going to survive the next 3 days. The phone rang again at midnight. She answered on the first ring. There was a long silence on the other end, just breathing, slow and steady. Then the king's voice, quieter, this time. "My sister chose you. I don't know why, but I honor her choices, even the last one." The line went dead. Maya sat on her bed with the phone in her hand and the black envelope on the nightstand and the photograph of Isabeau and the king glowing on her laptop screen. 2 days until the glass court. 2 days until she walked into a world that did not want her and demanded it explain why she was still alive. The glass court was a converted art gallery in downtown San Francisco, all floor-to-ceiling mirrors and crystal chandeliers that threw prismatic light across surfaces, polished to a gleam that hurt Maya's eyes. She stood in the entrance with Dominic at her elbow and felt every pair of eyes turn toward her, felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing pressing against her chest. The vampires wore tailored suits and gowns that belonged in museums or period films, fabrics that shimmered and flowed, jewelry that caught the light and threw it back in sharp angles. Maya wore jeans and a leather jacket and sneakers that squeaked on the marble floor when she took her first step inside. The air smelled like frost and old wine, cold and clean and wrong, and every breath she took felt like swallowing glass. Dominic's hand was light on her elbow, guiding her forward through the silent crowd that parted around them like water. The mirrors multiplied everything, created infinite versions of the attendees standing in clusters, watching, waiting, their faces pale and perfect and utterly still. No one spoke. No one blinked. Maya kept her chin up, and her hands loose at her sides, and tried not to think about how many of them could kill her before she managed to scream. Dominic led her to the center of the room, where a raised dais stood beneath the largest chandelier, a crystal thing the size of a car that cast light in 1,000 directions at once. On the dais was a marble pedestal, and on the pedestal was a single crystal glass, empty and gleaming. Dominic stopped at the edge of the dais and stepped back, leaving Maya alone in the center of the room with 100 reflections of herself staring back from every angle. Then the crowd shifted, and a door at the far end of the gallery opened, and the Vampire King walked in. The room went quieter, which should not have been possible, but the silence deepened into something that felt like held breath. He was tall and pale. Dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and cold beauty, the kind of face that belonged on marble statues or old coins. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the collar open at his throat, no jewelry except a silver ring on his right hand that caught the light as he moved. His eyes were dark, not silver, not glowing, just dark in a way that suggested depth and age and exhaustion. He did not look at Maya. He walked to the dais and stood beside the pedestal and faced the court, his hands loose at his sides, and the crowd bowed as one. Maya did not bow. The king's gaze swept across the room and stopped on a man standing near the front, older than the rest, or at least older looking, with silver hair and a sharp smile that did not reach his eyes. The man stepped forward, and the crowd shifted to let him pass. His suit was deep burgundy, expensive, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. He stopped 3 feet from the dais and inclined his head to the king, a gesture that was barely respectful. "Gregor," the king said, his voice low and textured with something that might have been weariness. "You have concerns." Gregor's smile widened. "Concerns is a polite word, my lord. I have objections." He turned to look at Maya, and his eyes were the color of old amber, cold and calculating. "The girl reeks of mortality. Isabeau was careless, and this one is a liability. A human wearing the mark is either a fraud or a threat. I demand verification." Maya felt her pulse spike but kept her expression neutral. The king's gaze finally shifted to her, just for a moment, and she saw nothing in his eyes that suggested he cared one way or another, whether she lived or died. "The verification is your right to request," the king said. He looked back at Gregor, and hers, to accept or refuse. Gregor gestured toward the crystal glass on the pedestal. "Then let her drink. 1 drop of your blood, my lord. If the mark is real, she'll survive. If not, she'll burn from the inside, and we'll know Isabeau's death was staged to smuggle a spy into our court." The crowd murmured, a low sound like wind through trees. Maya stared at the glass, and then at the king, and felt the trap close around her. Dominic had explained the verification during the drive to San Francisco, his voice calm and factual. It was a ritual, ancient, designed to prove kinship. The king's blood would recognize the mark if it was real. If it was not, the blood would destroy her in seconds. Maya had asked what it felt like. Dominic had said he did not know because he had never seen anyone survive a false verification. The king turned to Maya. "If you refuse, you prove his point. And I cannot protect you from a ruling." His voice was flat, empty of emotion. Maya met his eyes. "Then let me speak first." The king's expression did not change, but something shifted in the set of his shoulders, a slight relaxation that might have been surprise. He nodded once. Maya turned to face the court, to face Gregor and the 100 vampires watching her with eyes that had seen centuries and cared nothing for her life. Her voice shook on the first word, but she forced it steady. "I don't know your laws. I don't know why Isabeau came to me, but I know she was alone and bleeding and everyone turned away. I helped because that's what you do. If your world punishes that, then your world is broken." Gregor laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the mirrors. The girl has spirit, but spirit doesn't change the law. The king raised one hand and the laughter stopped. The gesture was small, almost casual, but the entire room went silent. He stepped down from the dais and walked toward Maya, his footsteps soundless on the marble. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the silver ring on his hand was worn smooth, old, engraved with symbols she did not recognize. "She's right," the king said, his voice carrying across the room. "We've built a court on blood oaths and forgotten mercy. Verification is her right to refuse. But the mark is mine to confirm." He turned and walked back to the dais, pulling a small knife from inside his jacket. The blade was silver, thin and sharp. He held his left hand over the crystal glass and drew the blade across his palm in one smooth motion. Blood welled up, dark and thick, and he tilted his hand to let 3 drops fall into the glass. They hit the crystal with a sound like bells. The king set the knife aside and picked up the glass, holding it up to the light. The blood swirled in the bottom, darker than wine, almost black. He looked at Maya. Then he drank. The room erupted. Not in sound, but in movement, a ripple that went through the crowd like a shockwave. The king's eyes flashed silver, bright and blinding, the same color Maya had seen in Isabeau's eyes before she died. He lowered the glass and the silver faded, leaving his eyes dark again. He turned to the court, and his voice was cold and absolute. "The mark is real. She carries my sister's last act. I name her ward and kin under the protection of this throne." Gregor stepped back, his face twisted with fury. "This is unprecedented. You risk everything for a human who knows nothing of our world." The king's gaze locked on Gregor, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "My sister died protecting something. Perhaps it was this, the idea that mercy still matters. I will not let her die for nothing." He turned to Maya, and for the first time she saw something human in his expression, something that might have been respect or exhaustion or grief. "You've just made enemies. Stay close." The court dissolved into whispers, clusters forming and reforming, voices rising in argument or agreement. Dominic appeared at Maya's side and leaned close, his voice barely audible. "You just became the most valuable piece on the board. And the most vulnerable." Maya watched the king walk back through the crowd, watched the way they parted for him, the way their eyes followed him with calculation and fear. She looked down at her hands, and they were shaking. The silver ring around her irises pulsed once, faint, in rhythm with her heartbeat. She had entered the glass court as a petitioner, a liability, a question mark. She was leaving as kin, as something protected and bound and trapped inside a world that moved by rules she did not understand and could not escape. The chandeliers above her hummed softly, and the mirrors showed 1,000 versions of herself, all of them marked, all of them standing alone in the center of a room full of predators. Gregor was still watching her from across the room, his smile gone, replaced by something cold and patient. The king had named her kin, but he had also painted a target on her back. Maya felt the weight of it settle in her chest, heavy and permanent. She had demanded to speak, and the king had listened. She had challenged the court and survived. But survival was not the same as safety. She was inside the system now, and the only way out was through. Dominic touched her elbow and guided her toward a side door where the king had disappeared. The crowd watched her go, silent again, their faces unreadable. Maya walked past them with her head up and her hands steady, and the taste of metal still coating her tongue. When she glanced back at the mirrors, she saw her reflection ringed in silver light, and for just a moment she thought she saw another figure standing beside her, dark-haired and pale, wearing a torn silk dress. Isabeau. Then the light shifted, and the figure was gone, and Maya was alone again, walking into a future she had not chosen but could no longer avoid. The penthouse was all glass and steel, 50 floors above San Francisco, with a view of the bay that stretched to the horizon, bridges strung with lights, and the city glittering below like a circuit board. Maya stood at the window and felt like she was floating, untethered, the ground too far away to matter. Dominic had driven her here from the glass court in silence, the Jaguar purring through streets that emptied as they climbed higher into the financial district. The building had no name on the door, just a security desk and an elevator that required a keycard and a palm print. The penthouse took up the entire top floor. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that looked like it had never been used, furniture that was expensive and uncomfortable, all hard edges and cold leather. Guards stood at every door, silent men in dark suits who did not look at her when she passed. Cameras covered every angle. Maya had asked if this was the king's home. Dominic had said it was one of them, a secondary residence, secure. Maya had asked how many homes the king had. Dominic had not answered. She was given the second bedroom, a space with a king bed and blackout curtains and a bathroom larger than her old studio apartment. She unpacked her bag, and it took 30 seconds because she had brought almost nothing. Jeans, jacket, sneakers, a toothbrush, everything she owned fit in a duffel that looked small and pathetic sitting on the bed. Dominic knocked once and entered without waiting for permission, carrying a leather-bound book the size of a dictionary. He set it on the desk by the window. "This is the Codex, the compiled laws that govern our world. You need to read it, all of it." Maya stared at the book. It had to be 1,000 pages. "How long do I have?" 2 weeks until the blood moon." Dominic's voice was flat. "Gregor will challenge the king then. If he wins, he'll kill you to prove the mark was a mistake. So read, fast." He turned to leave and Maya called after him. "The summoning. When does that happen?" "Whenever the king calls it. Could be tomorrow. Could be a decade from now." Dominic paused in the doorway. "When he does, you answer truthfully. The mark will know if you lie. It'll burn you from the inside." Maya felt cold despite the lack of draft. What does he want to know? "I don't know. He's never used a summoning before, not in the 300 years I've served him." Maya sat down hard on the bed. "Then why bind me to one?" "Because it's the law. Because Isabeau's blood activated the pact and now you're kin whether you like it or not." Dominic looked at her and his expression softened slightly. "Read the codex. Learn the rules. Never break eye contact first. Never accept food from anyone but the king or me. Never answer a question you haven't heard twice. People here will try to trap you with words. Don't let them." He left. Maya opened the codex. The first page was handwritten in ink so old it had faded to brown. The script was formal, archaic, detailing the structure of vampire courts and the hierarchy of blood. She read until her eyes burned, and the sun set outside the glass walls, and the city below lit up like stars. The king visited once, 3 days after she moved in. She was in the living room surrounded by books Dominic had brought her, histories and genealogies and accounts of court politics that read like war journals. She heard the elevator open and looked up to see him standing in the doorway, still in the charcoal suit from the glass court, his tie loosened and his expression carved from stone. He did not knock. He walked to the window and stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the bay. Maya set her book aside and waited. "Gregor is gathering allies," the king said without turning around. "He's claiming I've gone soft. That validating a human's mark sets a precedent that will destroy us. There will be a challenge at the blood moon. If he wins, you die." Maya's throat was dry. "And if you win, then you stay alive and he's exiled or executed depending on how generous I'm feeling." The king turned to look at her. His eyes were dark, shadowed, exhausted. "I wanted you to know what's coming." Maya stood. "Why not just let him win? Give him what he wants. You'd be rid of me and the problem goes away." The king's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Something that might have been surprise or anger or both. "Because my sister thought you were worth dying for." and I will not betray her twice. He walked past her toward the elevator. Maya watched him go and felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. The king stopped at the elevator and pressed the button. Without looking back, he said, "Dominic will continue your education. Learn quickly." Then he was gone, and Maya was alone with the books and the view and the guards outside every door. She learned quickly. Dominic drilled her on etiquette and history, on the names of the major bloodlines and the alliances that held the court together. He taught her how to move through vampire society without getting killed. Never show fear. Never show weakness. Never let them see you bleed. She learned that Isabeau had been the king's younger sister, turned during the French Revolution when she was 19, and he was already 2 centuries old. She had been gentle where he was cold, human where he had forgotten how to be. She painted watercolors and read poetry and remembered what it felt like to be mortal. She had spent decades trying to broker peace between rival covens, believing that vampire society could evolve beyond blood oaths and violence. She had been negotiating a truce with Gregor's people when they ambushed her. Her final act, bleeding out from a wound that would have healed if she had fed, was to stumble into a diner in the middle of nowhere and test whether humanity still existed even in death. Maya asked Dominic why Isabeau had not just healed herself. Dominic's face went carefully blank, because she chose not to, because she was looking for someone who would help her without knowing what she was. "She found you." Maya felt grief rise hot in her throat. She didn't collapse at the diner by accident. No, she chose it. She chose you. Maya found Isabeau's room on the 5th day. It was at the end of a hallway she had been avoiding, a door that was unlocked but felt forbidden. She opened it and the smell of lavender and dust washed over her. The room was untouched, frozen in time. Watercolor paintings lined the walls, soft landscapes and portraits of people Maya did not recognize. Books of poetry filled a shelf by the window, spines cracked and pages dog-eared. A dress hung in the closet, pale blue silk with lace at the collar, the kind of thing someone wore to a garden party in a different century. Maya stood in the center of the room and felt like she was trespassing on a grave. She found a journal in the desk drawer, leather-bound and filled with Isabeau's handwriting. The entries were dated, spanning decades, thoughts and observations and sketches. The last entry was from 3 weeks before she died. It read, "I wonder if kindness still exists outside our world. I think I will go looking for it. If I find it, perhaps there is hope for us yet." Maya closed the journal and left the room and did not go back. Meanwhile, Gregor's people started circling. Maya noticed them on the 3rd day. A black car parked across the street from the building, different drivers, but the same cold patience. Dominic noticed too and doubled the guards. On the 6th day, Frank called her burner phone, the one Dominic had given her to replace the one from the king. "2 men in suits came by the diner asking about you. I told them you quit. They didn't believe me." Maya felt her pulse spike. "Are you okay?" Frank's voice was grim. "I'm fine, but you need to be careful. These aren't the kind of people who forget." Maya thanked him and hung up. Dominic found her staring out the window at the city below. "Your old apartment was ransacked last night. They're looking for leverage, for anything that connects you to someone they can hurt. Do you have family?" "No," Maya said. "No one." Dominic nodded. "That's probably for the best." The noose was tightening. Maya felt it in the way the guards moved, tense and watchful. She felt it in the messages Dominic received on his phone, terse updates that made his jaw clench. She felt it in the silence of the penthouse, the way even the air seemed to hold its breath. On the 10th day, the king came back. It was late, past midnight, and Maya was awake reading the codex for the 3rd time, trying to memorize the laws around challenges and blood duels. She heard the elevator and looked up to see him standing in the living room, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked more human than she had ever seen him, tired and rumpled and real. He walked to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot Maya had made hours ago. He did not need coffee. Dominic had told her that, but the king drank it anyway, black and cold, standing at the counter. Maya closed the codex and joined him. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Let Gregor have the court. Walk away." The king looked at her over the rim of his cup. "I've spent 3 centuries enforcing laws I no longer believe in, but if I stop, the system collapses. So I endure." He set the cup down. Isabeau tried to change it from the inside. "Look where that got her." "Then maybe it's time to burn the system down," Maya said. The king's eyes went cold and dangerous. "Careful. You sound like her." "Good," Maya said. Maybe she was right. The king stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his cup and walked to the window. He stood there in silence, looking out at the city, and Maya watched the way the light from below cast shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion and the weight of centuries. "Why do you keep fighting?" she asked quietly. "If you don't believe in it anymore, why not just let go?" "Because I made a promise," the king said, "to Isabeau, to everyone who trusted me to hold the line. And because if I let go, people like Gregor take over. And his world is worse." He turned to look at her. "My sister believed mercy could coexist with our laws. She believed kindness still mattered. I didn't understand what she meant until I saw you at the glass court. Until I watched you stand in front of a room full of predators and tell them their world was broken. She was testing something when she came to your diner, and you passed." Maya felt her throat tighten. "I didn't save her." "No," the king said. "But you tried. And that's what she was looking for. Proof that humanity still exists." He set his cup down and walked toward the elevator. "The blood moon is in 4 days. Gregor will come for me, and when he does, he'll come for you. Stay close to Dominic. Don't leave the penthouse, and if something happens to me, run." Maya's chest went cold. "What do you mean if something happens?" The king pressed the elevator button. "I mean, I've been alive for 300 years and I'm tired. I mean, Gregor is strong and angry and he has allies I don't. I mean, there's a chance I lose. And if I do, you need to disappear before he finds you." The elevator opened and he stepped inside. Maya moved toward him. "You're not going to lose." The king looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like doubt in his eyes. "I hope you're right." The doors closed and he was gone. Maya stood in the empty living room and felt the weight of everything crashing down around her. She walked to Isabeau's room and stood in the doorway, looking at the watercolors and the books and the dress hanging in the closet. She thought about a woman who had spent centuries trying to prove that kindness still mattered, who had died testing whether humanity existed, who had chosen Maya out of all the people in the world. She thought about a king who had ruled for 300 years and was too tired to remember why. She thought about Gregor and the blood moon and the challenge that was coming in 4 days. And she thought about what the king had said. "Maybe it's time to burn the system down. Careful. You sound like her." Maya closed the door to Isabeau's room and went back to the codex. She had 4 days to learn everything she could. 4 days to prepare for a fight she could not win, but could not afford to lose. 4 days until the blood moon, and the moment when everything would either change or end. 3 days later, Maya stood behind the counter at Frank's diner, pouring coffee for the morning shift. The smell of bacon grease and burnt toast filling the air, with a normalcy that felt almost aggressive after everything that had happened. The regulars came in and ordered the same things they always ordered, and did not look at her any differently than they had a month ago. The truckers wanted eggs over easy and wheat toast. The construction crew wanted the breakfast special with extra hash browns. The retired cop who sat at the end booth wanted black coffee and nothing else, same as always. Maya poured and served and wiped down the counter and felt the rhythm of the work settle into her bones like muscle memory. Frank nodded at her from the kitchen window. his face carved from stone, and decades of keeping his mouth shut, and said nothing. The world had moved on. But Maya knew it was different now. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror during her break, leaning close to the glass and tilting her head until the light hit just right. The silver ring around her irises was still there, faint but unmistakable. A reminder that she was no longer entirely the person she had been before a dying woman stumbled through the door and bled out on the black and white checkered floor. She touched her face, and the reflection touched back, and the silver ring pulsed once in rhythm with her heartbeat. She went back to work. The sun was just starting to rise when the Vampire King walked in, alone. No Dominic or guards or entourage. He wore dark jeans and a leather jacket, and looked more human than she had ever seen him, tired but unburdened, the weight of 3 centuries sitting lighter on his shoulders. He sat at the counter and Maya poured him coffee without asking. They did not speak for a long moment. The diner was empty except for them and Frank in the back and the highway outside, stretching into nothing under a sky bleeding gold and pink. The king wrapped his hands around the cup and stared at the dark liquid like it held answers. "The court is adapting," he said finally, slowly. "Some of the old ones are leaving, they don't like the changes. Some of the young ones are asking questions about the mark, about what it means that a human is kin now. Isabeau would have liked that." Maya leaned against the counter. She would have. The king nodded and reached into his jacket, pulling out a plain white envelope. No wax seal this time, just paper and ink. He slid it across the counter. Maya picked it up and opened it. Inside was a handwritten note on cream-colored paper, the script neat and precise. "When you're ready, there's a place for you here. Not as kin, as counsel. We need people who remember what mercy looks like." It was signed with a single letter. D. Maya looked up. "Dominic wrote this." The king almost smiled. "He thought you'd be more likely to listen if it came from him." "He's not wrong." "What if I say no?" Maya asked. The king stood, dropping a 20 on the counter for coffee that cost $3. "Then I'll ask again tomorrow. And the day after. I'm very patient." He walked toward the door and paused with his hand on the handle. "Isabeau used to say that the best way to honor the dead is to keep living the way they hoped we would." His voice was quiet, almost lost under the hum of the fluorescent lights and the sizzle of the grill. "I think she'd be proud of you." He pushed open the door, and the bell chimed, and he walked out into the parking lot where his black sedan waited. Maya watched through the glass as he got in and drove away, the car disappearing down the highway as the sun climbed higher and washed out the darkness. She looked at the note again, reading Dominic's words a second time. A place for her. Not as something protected or bound, but as someone with a voice, with a role in shaping what came next. She thought about the glass court, and the mirrors, and the way the king had drunk his own blood to validate the mark. She thought about Isabeau's room with the watercolors and the poetry and the dress hanging in the closet. She thought about the cathedral and the proving, and the moment she had thrown the silver knife because she could not let the king fight alone. She folded the note and tucked it into her apron pocket. The diner bell chimed. A man walked in, middle-aged and tired-looking, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots. He sat at the counter and Maya grabbed the coffee pot. "Morning. What can I get you?" The man ordered eggs and toast, and she wrote it down and called it back to Frank. She poured coffee and set the cup in front of the man and turned to refill the sugar dispensers. That was when she saw it. On the corner of the counter, barely visible against the red vinyl, sat a second black envelope. Heavy paper, wax seal embossed with a tree and a crescent moon. No name. Just the seal, deep red and waiting. Maya's pulse spiked. She had not seen the king leave it, had not seen anyone approach the counter, but it was there, solid and real, the weight of it pulling at the edge of her vision. The summoning, the debt she still owed. One question, one answer, one truth she was bound to give when the king called it in. She reached for the envelope, and her fingers brushed the wax. It was warm, like it had just been sealed. She picked it up and turned it over in her hands. The seal was unbroken. She could open it now or she could wait. She could refuse or she could answer. But the choice was hers, and that mattered. She set the envelope down and looked at her reflection in the glass door. Two figures. One was her, apron stained with coffee, and eyes ringed in silver. The other was a shadow, faint and barely there. A woman in a torn silk dress with dark hair and a smile that suggested secrets. Isabeau. Maya blinked, and the shadow was gone. Just her reflection now, standing alone in the diner with the sunrise behind her and the highway stretching into nothing. She thought about what the king had said. The best way to honor the dead is to keep living the way they hoped we would. Isabeau had hoped for kindness, for mercy, for proof that humanity still existed, even in a world built on blood and law and ancient debts. Maya had given her that, and in return she had been marked and bound and pulled into a world that did not want her, but could not let her go. The man at the counter cleared his throat and Maya turned back to him, pushing the black envelope to the side. His eggs were ready. She served them and refilled his coffee, and moved through the rest of her shift with the envelope sitting on the counter like a ticking clock. Frank came out once, saw the envelope, and shook his head. "You gonna open that?" "Not yet," Maya said. Frank grunted and went back to the kitchen. When her shift ended, Maya untied her apron and folded it on the counter. She picked up the black envelope and the white one with Dominic's note and held them both in her hands, feeling the weight of two futures, two choices, two paths that led into darkness she could not see. The summoning would come when the king decided. It could be tomorrow or a decade from now, and when it did, she would answer because the mark bound her to truth, and she had agreed to that the moment she pressed her apron to Isabeau's throat and tried to save a stranger. But the council seat was a choice, a chance to build something better, a way to honor what Isabeau had died for. Maya tucked both envelopes into her jacket pocket and walked out of the diner into the morning light. The highway was quiet. The sky was blue and endless. The silver ring around her irises pulsed once, faint, in rhythm with her heartbeat. She got in her car and started the engine and sat there for a moment, looking back at the diner through the windshield. Frank stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. He raised one hand in a wave that might have been goodbye or good luck, or just acknowledgement that the world had changed and there was no going back. Maya waved back. Then she pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the city, toward the penthouse and Dominic and the king and the court, that was adapting slowly to the idea that mercy still mattered. She did not know what the summoning would ask of her. She did not know if she would accept the council seat or walk away and try to build a normal life. But she knew she was no longer the waitress who had poured coffee and avoided questions and kept her head down. She was marked. She was kin. She was someone who had stood in front of a room full of predators and told them their world was broken. And she was someone who had thrown a silver knife to save a king who was tired of losing people. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since Isabeau had collapsed in the diner doorway, Maya felt like she was choosing her own path instead of being pulled along by forces she did not understand. The sun climbed higher. The city rose in the distance, glass and steel catching the light. And in her pocket, the black envelope with the wax seal waited, patient and inevitable, a reminder that some debts could not be escaped, but maybe, just maybe, they could be transformed into something worth paying.